a second. Okay. I'm Daryl Cooperstock, for those of you who are not from Becky. I'll be the tech host this evening. And Shoshana, who you probably have met already while I was screening the film, is our program host. Today is Wednesday, December 23rd, and our presenters are Miriam, is it Levin or Levin? I'm sorry.
It's Lewin.
Oh, it's Lewin, and terrific. I mistyped it. So thank you for the correction. So it's Miriam Lewin and Rabbi Kevin Hale. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Tonight's session is being recorded with permission from our presenters, and it'll be available on the Becky website probably in the next couple of days. I think actually we're behind on a couple of posting a couple of recordings, so let's do that. And just go to the learning menu on our website, and it's the very last choice, online schmoozes, and you can find all of the schmoozes that have been given permission to be posted will be there, and it's a really lovely selection. I believe that we are going to have some screen sharing this evening from our presenters, and their questions, they're going to do a short presentation since, you know, the bulk of the presentation was the film itself. They're going to do a short presentation, and after that we'll take questions and answers. For everyone's sake, I ask that all participants remain muted during their presentation. Actually, if you will remain muted during the entire program, except if you're called on for your question or comment, that would be the least distracting for everybody. I will monitor background noises in the meantime and mute anybody who isn't doing it for themselves. If you have a question or a comment to address to one of our presenters, please write the word comment, only the word comment or question in the chat to me. You can write it to everyone. I'm going to be monitoring. Do not type your question or your comment in the chat, because then you will not be listening to the discussion that's happening, and also we'll waste the time with just repeating that. So I'll call on you. Remember what your question or comment was, and when I call on you, please unmute yourself at that time, and when you're done, please put yourself back on mute. Does anybody have any questions about format or tech? Nope. Okay, Shoshana, it's all yours.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. It's nice to see your faces. Some of you, most of you familiar, a few unfamiliar, but it's great to see all of you. Miriam, I've been just emailing with you and talking to you on the phone, so it's nice to actually remember what you look like and see you. And Rabbi Hale, I feel like I know you because I just watched the movie through twice. So as far as I'm concerned, we're old friends, but I will introduce you. Rabbi Kevin Hale, who we met in the film, is joining us from Western Massachusetts this evening. His work includes evaluating and restoring Torah scrolls, scribing other sacred items, and teaching about the scribal traditions of Judaism. Since 2012, he's been one of the approved scribes for the Czech scrolls that belong to the Memorial Scrolls Trust. Welcome, Rabbi Hale. Miriam is the director, Miriam Lewin is the director and producer of Commandment 613. She's joining us from Brooklyn, and her films include documentaries about teaching the arts, housing discrimination, and the Yale Glee Club. That's quite a variety. And she also produces classical music radio programs. You might have heard some of her Jewish holiday specials hosted by violinist Itzhak Perlman. And she manages the world's oldest opera super title business. Very cool. Corey, you look like you didn't know that. Did you know that? Wow, I know, I didn't know that either. Very cool. Well, welcome, and I will now turn the program over to you, Miriam and Rabbi Hale. We are all eager to hear what you have to say.
Well, thank you, Shoshana. And Daryl, I have to say this was a beautifully organized and technically seamless event, which is really a pleasure. And I want to say hello to Corey Stone and Sue McDonald, my old friends. Corey was the, the one who set this up, and I was delighted to learn that Shoshana was the one who handles these events for Becky, because I met Shoshana many years ago through Corey and Sue. So that's great. I also want to say that it's nice for Kevin and me to be back in New Haven, since both of us went to Yale and haven't been there for a while. And I also would like to say hello to the newest New Havenite, my stepdaughter, Sonia Bloom, who moved to New Haven about a month ago, a little more than a month ago. And you can feel free to put messages in the chat to her about Yiddish happenings, because she is a Yiddishist, Yiddish happenings in New Haven, job postings, because she's looking for part-time work, and where to get lox and bagels, because she hasn't figured that out yet. Okay, so pay attention, but you can chat to Sonia. I just want to say a little bit of an introduction, because people always ask me what I learned when I was making this film. And the answer is just about everything you saw, I did not know. I didn't know that there were 613 commandments, much less what the last one was, to write your own scroll. I didn't know that kosher could apply to anything other than food. And I didn't know how old scrolls are, which they can be a couple of hundred or even more years old, which I find fascinating, these kind of living, ongoing things. And making this film really connected me to Judaism in a whole new way, and I hope it will have done that for you too. A little bit about the Memorial Scrolls Trust, which, as you saw, is the actual owner of these scrolls that came from Czechoslovakia, though they are on quasi-permanent loan to institutions around the world, to synagogues, educational institutions, libraries, museums, summer camps. They're in 27 countries on 4 continents, but about 1,000 of them are in the United States. And I believe that your synagogue does not have one, but I believe that Corey and Sue, your other synagogue in Hampton has one of them. Nod your head, Corey and Sue.
Yes, you outed us.
Yes.
Mishkan Israel has a.
Okay, so they're all around. I'm always surprised how many there are when I start talking to friends and say, "Oh yeah, we have one of those, sure." So I was going to show you some pictures of the towns in Czechoslovakia that these come from, but I think I'd like to go straight to hearing your questions, because you've just watched the film, and I wanted to have your fresh impressions. So you're welcome to ask me questions about the film, Kevin questions about being a rabbi, being a scribe, doing this ancient craft in this modern age. I'll turn it back to you, Shoshana. Or Daryl, whoever's fielding the questions.
Okay, well, so far we don't have questions that have come in yet, but I would like to say something about this. It's not exactly a question. I guess it's more of a comment. For me personally, this was it was a wonderful film to watch. I wanted to be a Torah scribe. When I was, I think it was in 1969, I had started studying calligraphy. I was very involved Jewishly as a teen, and it just seemed a way to tie together things that I was really interested in. But as you can imagine, in 1969, there weren't a whole lot of traditional sofrim that were lining up girls to be apprentices. And there was no way for me to find a way to learn with a sofer how to do traditional, how to become a Torah scribe. On the other hand, I had this challenge ahead of me that would have taken a lot of will and a lot of chutzpah to pursue, which at that time I didn't have anywhere near as much as I have now. I couldn't find anybody to take me on as an apprentice. I did talk to a couple of rabbis, and everybody was less than gracious about it. but I was also concerned that even if somebody would take me on, that I didn't necessarily have the confidence that I had the spiritual intention or the ritual commitment that I believed at the time a sofer should have toward the job that they were doing. And so I let it go. I became a ketubah maker. And I did that for a very long time and concentrated on that aspect of joining things together. And it was only later, and I must say over a half a century later, that I found out that in 1969, there was a woman born to a Christian family in Canada. Her name was Avielle Barclay. And on October 6th, which is my birthday, on October 6th of 2003, she became the very first soferet who was certified as having been trained by a traditional scribe. And as you can see, it's a very emotional journey to have watched that happen, because instead of being able to do that, which you are able to do, and which is it's a wonderful, wonderful calling, I turned all my attention to the art side of it, to the reading Torah side of it, to the community side of it, and that's all been fine. And I feel that I've accomplished a lot. But having watched the film threw me back to that disappointment and that confusion and all of the struggles that people had to make to get to a point where a woman actually could do it. Avielle Barclay actually was born Christian and was a convert and studied and became a soferet. So I would, like to thank you for giving me that experience again. And now I see we have some questions. And so thanks for indulging me. Let's see who we have. Marge has the first question.
Hi, that was an amazingly fulfilling and emotional moment for me. My question is, do the synagogues who receive these Torahs help to contribute for the restoration? And also, how do you know when there's been too much damage to actually restore the Torah? Thanks.
Miriam, I'll take that as a question for me, but generally speaking, synagogues who hold the scrolls decide whether they are to be restored or whether they're held in different ways. And the trust is just concerned that they be held in a respectful way. But it's usually the synagogue deciding we'd like to know, first of all, how much we should insure it for, or is it restorable? And so evaluating them is a part of it, and then the decision's made, and sometimes there's fundraising, and sometimes there's a lot of fundraising in order to restore a scroll. There's some interesting exceptions, and when I visited the Memorial Scrolls Trust a few years ago, I learned that the trust itself was having a very special scroll restored that I believe, and Miriam, you may know more about this, I believe was one that was returned to the community from which it came.
I believe there has only been one scroll that has gone back to the community from which it came in Czechoslovakia, in the Czech Republic. That's kind of it's sort of an understanding, though not a rule, that if a community reforms in the Czech Republic, that a scroll will go back to them.
And I think that was a decision of the trust in that case.
And also the community in California that had the scroll was eager to take it back there. They had another one. They had a second Memorial Scrolls Trust scroll, so it was easy for them to do. But they've actually become very involved with that community. The California community and the Czech community have become sort of partnered. I'm not sure Kevin answered the first part of that question, Marge, but it is the synagogue that is caring for the scroll that is responsible for paying for the upkeep
Great,
and the
thank you.
restoration.
Yes, thank you.
Joanne, you're next. Can you unmute, Joanne? Thank you.
I don't know how many old time Becky people there are here, but and how many are aware that Rabbi Friedman was a sofer.
Oh,
And I studied Talmud with him starting in 1976. Through the Federation, he had a weekly Talmud class at noon, and it was only incidentally that I learned that he was a sofer. He grew up in Lithuania, and he was trained as a very young, from his youngest childhood on, because they saw he had artistic talent. And from the age of 5, he was trained to be a sofer. And he always talked about it incidentally, but it became a very interesting part of this class that I was taking. It was either 5 minutes one week, 3 minutes another week. And I'm curious, in terms of what the difference is in the kind of training that you had in the modern era and the kind of training he had, being trained as a young child growing up, receiving smicha in Lithuania and learning this skill from a very early age on, including making his own ink from the oak walnuts and, from soup to nuts. He had to learn everything. And as I said, from age 5 on. So Kevin, that's my question from you, what the difference is in modern.
Yeah, some level, there isn't a difference, and this maybe the one thing in Jewish life that, isn't really so debatable about, do we use kosher ink or do we use another kind of ink? But, your late rabbi had, was able to grow up in a sort of organic community in which there were sofrim around. There was one down the block. And in my case, I had maybe a similar kind of apprenticeship, but it took the form of driving from Northampton down to Great Neck, Long Island for a few days a month over the course of a number of years. But the full training that I received from Rabbi Ray, who was a wonderful teacher and mentor, just a second, really covered all aspects from how to make ink and construct a tefillin by it to different styles of writing. And maybe getting back also to, Aviel Barkley was really a pioneer. Maybe I'll piggyback that question as well. And, we're living in this world that is more and more bereft of scribes. And there's very specific places in the world, limited places where there are scribes and knowledge about it. And I think that Rabbi Ray felt it was a task to spread it, and took on women as students about 20 years ago when it was still very unusual. And a tremendous change has happened over those 20 years that it's not just that there are scribes who are other than male, but that the availability of knowledge and ways of learning is really increased. And maybe we're looking ahead to a day when if you want to learn to be a scribe, he or she is 5 minutes away.
thank you. I think our next person is Cynthia.
Hi. So thank you very much. I enjoyed seeing the film. Before I get to my actual question, I have a kind of point of information question. When you say the trust, is that in London or in Prague?
The Memorial Scrolls Trust is in London. The
Okay.
scrolls went from Prague to London. They were actually sold.
Okay, so that actually answers what the question was as well. Part of my question, how that transfer actually, this is a two-part question and the first part didn't count. That was point of information.
As many as you like.
How that transfer actually came about, which I think is really interesting in and of itself. Then the other part of the question, it happens that I am also an artist, and I had an exhibit at the Jewish Museum in Prague and got to live in the Jewish Museum in Prague for 2 weeks. Yes, I lived in the Jewish Museum.
In the museum, wow.
So I'm very aware of the fact that they have a range of objects. And while I understand that the Torah is a different class, there are as many menorahs or other kinds of things as well. So that's why it's a two-part question: how the transfer happened with the Torah scrolls, and are there any plans that you know of to spread around some of the other things that are collected or that were rescued? Collected is not quite the right word.
Well, you're absolutely right that along with the Torah scrolls that were collected from all over Bohemia and Moravia in Czechoslovakia, there were many, many, many other objects that were collected and cataloged by the workers of the Jewish Museum in Prague, many of which are on display in that museum, which is a fantastic museum. The scrolls themselves were kind of stored and almost forgotten after the war, and were moldering in an unused synagogue outside of Prague in the early 60s, when the Czechoslovak at that time government was looking to make money and selling off art. And they said, hey, maybe we can make some money on this. And a donor was found in London. Actually, Kevin, I think he was American, wasn't he? But in London. And
was that Estroff or someone else?
Estrick, I think, yeah.
Estrick, yeah.
And he purchased this. All happened rather quickly. I think between November of 1963 and January or February of 1964. And they all went to London, where the folks at the Westminster Synagogue said, oh my goodness, what do we have? And started having them restored and decided to spread them out all over the world. And interestingly, they didn't want them to go just to Orthodox or just to Reform congregations. They wanted them to go to a real variety of institutions, so that this legacy would be carried forward in all kinds of situations.
Okay, so that's really interesting, that part of the story, actually. And then for the menorahs, because there really are a lot of other objects too. So I just wonder, maybe this is just the start of something. Yeah. And other people will.
You know, I'll just chime in. I'm not aware that the Jewish Museum of Prague is interested in sharing or selling. You know, there was an amazing exhibit. Maybe it was traveling about 35 years ago, called A Precious Legacy. And treasures from the Czech Museum were displayed, but it was, you know, I'm not aware that anything by way of metal of you know, the silver adornments came with the scrolls. I think it was really, you know, these 1,564 Torah scrolls, maybe some covers, and you know, it could be that there was a sense that the museum needs to keep things that have, you know, intrinsic value, but here's something. I can't imagine that the Czech government valued them very much, like Manhattan for 24 bucks. But the synagogue in London established the trust, again, very quickly in order to receive them.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. I find that the history and how people were moved enough to take action really interesting. And I either have the catalog on my bookshelf I'm peeking over, or it's in the Becky Library.
Precious legacy.
One of those two places. So I'll look in a second, see if I have out of the Precious Legacy. Okay.
While we're on the subject of museums, excuse me just a second, there's kind of a myth that the Nazis intended to establish a museum of an extinct race using these Torah scrolls and religious objects that were collected all over Czechoslovakia. And that is repeated quite a bit. And in fact, it's never been proven that that was the case, which is why the wording on screen in that section of the film is extremely careful. The words are extremely carefully chosen. And in fact, somebody from the Jewish Museum in Prague a few years ago wrote a very long study. She surveyed all the evidence she could find, and there was no conclusive proof that they were intending to make that kind of museum. So I just throw that out there because I hear that from time to time.
Everybody hears it, so it's very interesting. Thank you. Really interesting.
Thank you. I think, Sue, you had a comment next or a question?
Yes, this has to do with the first or an early question about the synagogues that take responsibility for a scroll, having the responsibility also for raising the money necessary for the restoration. The scroll that's at Mishkan Israel, I think they dedicated it in 1988. And they use it for every bar and bat mitzvah. It is the scroll from which the bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah kids read, because they really wanted to make it very central and make sure it was used, because that's what helps keep it breathing and all that. We also, before we moved back to the New Haven area, we lived in Stamford, and our synagogue there, while we were there as members for about 10 years, acquired Torah Scrolls Trust scroll that was not in good enough condition to be repaired. So they had to make a decision about how to share that with the community. And, you know, they took it to a sofer to have it evaluated, and that was the conclusion that was reached. And so it is on display with explanatory information in the atrium of the synagogue building, and you walk. It's right there as you go into the sanctuary. And so one of the questions that raises for me is, out of all these scrolls, do you know how many of them are actually have been repaired and are able to be used, as opposed to being so damaged that the best option is to display them in that way?
I don't know a number, but the scrolls are in varying degrees of condition. The first one that I actually looked at closely was close to me in Amherst, Massachusetts, and it was right at the beginning of my learning to be a sofer about 20 years ago, and it's really an amazing scroll. Column after column, the ink is completely missing. And what's clear is that Torah scroll was pasul, that is, it was not kosher, long before the Shoah. Actually, there's one place where the parchment was repaired with a little piece of gummed paper that had Cyrillic printing on it. So it connects with an important question for me, which is, even if a Torah can be restored and become kosher again, should it? Many of them are 200, 250 years old. And it's really a question of, is there a point, even these precious scrolls that are connection to pre-Shoah communities, where we let them, for lack of a better expression, go the way of all flesh, and let them just be a not kosher Torah that is still holy and is still beloved and danced with, maybe, doesn't necessarily need to be buried. And as the scrolls get older, really many of them are 250 years old, well, it's the subject of my proposed doctoral project at the Hartford Seminary of at what point would the trust be able to discern whether scrolls should or shouldn't be repaired. I just, to bring in 2 examples, right now I'm beginning work on a Czech scroll that is from the congregation in Woodstock, Vermont. And they were very clear that they did not want it to be restored as a kosher Torah. Their reasons were varied. And I think the primary one was that the donor actually had the strong feeling that it should be remembered in its sort of broken state. And it wasn't until I really looked at it closely that I saw there was so much black mold that it really couldn't be repaired. And so this is a case where we're really negotiating about, well, structurally, what kind of repairs can be done and how will it be used so that it'll be treasured and learned from, but doesn't have to, perform as a kosher Torah. It's a great, deep issue.
Wow. Interesting. Thank you. Corey, you had a question as well?
Yeah, this is for Rabbi Kevin, and I'm referring back to the movie where you used the term sacred craft in connection, I think, with toy making originally. And I'm struck by the term because it implied, I think you used it in the generic sacred craft, that there are multiple sacred crafts, like Daryl making a ketubah as a sacred craft. But what is it that makes a sacred craft sacred? And we're in an interesting time when there is more attention being given to artisanal creation where there is intent behind it, but I think you mean more than that, and I'll stop there, but I'm curious what you mean and how you think about it.
Wow, what a question. I mean, I feel like I want to turn it to the filmmaker and say, oh, and you chose to use that expression in the title. So long ago, after graduating from Yale as a classics major and before becoming a scribe, I was a self-employed toy maker. And during those years, just did a fair amount of reflecting and reading about when you do craft, to do it with integrity. And I was talking with a potter, and I know a welder. Actually, he's not even an artist. He's a professional craftsperson welder. And I think that it's really an ancient sense of, it's in our hands to do something with integrity, or we could be doing it unconsciously. There might be some, almost any craft or field. So I won't define sacred craft, so to speak, but I would say I've been really interested all along about those hands-on aspects of Jewish life that are craft. And so along with, I've been a sofer for almost 20 years and about to begin a study in another sort of essential sacred craft, which is to be a misader gittin, that is one who is responsible for gets. Rabbinical Assembly is after 15 years is offering another 2-year training. And there are places in Jewish life where we do hands-on things. I don't have it in me to be a moel, but I've done a little training in shlita, in kosher slaughtering as well. So sacred craft is everywhere, I should say.
Thank you, Corey. A little comment here, the question and Rabbi Hale, your answer reminds me about one of my favorite high holiday prayers, which is Kihine Kachomer, which describes God and his relationship with humans, using the metaphors of an artisan and those things that he or she creates. And it's always, I've just always found it very moving. And your discussion about making toys in this way with an intention and a relationship and all of that just brought that to mind. So thank you. Let's see.
I don't remember the exact words, but it's essentially as a potter, you know,
yeah,
does that craft with clay, so does God.
Right.
God does, and goes through all these.
Here, I have a translation right here. Indeed, as the clay in the hand of the potter, who when he wishes expands it, and when he wishes contracts it, so are we in your hand, O you who remembers deeds of loving kindness. And then it goes on to talk about different kinds of artisans, and it's a beautiful prayer. I think, Rena, I think you have a question.
So
Yes.
Yes, I want to continue in this vein. It is very rare, maybe never, that I've heard these words together, self-employed toy maker. So I really think we'd like to hear maybe just a few more words about what that meant.
Well, some people listened to their parents and had practical degrees from college, and some said, no, I want to study classics. So after graduating from Yale with my classical civilization degree, I went out to Berkeley, California, and I realized I didn't have any jobs, and learned how to make folk toys. And for a number of years, I was a street artist, and spent a lot of time. You know, it's a similar balance in my life as a scribe. That is, most of the time was spent alone at home doing this craft, and then occasionally I would go out to a fair, and that would be really thrilling, you know, to be interacting with people with this sacred craft. And something that really, I'm fortunate that there is still work, even though many synagogues are not taking out their Torahs right now. But most of the work that I do right now is like the sitting home alone doing the toy making. And this film, to me, is kind of a glimpse back into this amazing pre-COVID-19 world where we would interact with each other and we would get really close. It's a magic about, you know, how we interact with each other and sacred objects that I miss.
I still have one of your rats.
So I guess I'll do. I'm really delighted. A little shout out that my friend Ellen, who lives up the road from you in Cromwell, I think. We go back.
But...
Okay. We go Middletown. We go back to the old country of Long Island where we grew up, and so her sacred craft is journalism, which, you know, you might think, oh, there aren't scribes anymore, there aren't journalists anymore, but these are ancient crafts that still are needed. And the other shout out, if I may, is Uriel Teva, and his late father Michael was, I used to call him my scribal brother or partner in crime, who introduced me to our teacher. And I think that makes Uriel my scribal nephew. I'm not quite sure. And he's in New Haven working on a doctorate. Sacred crafts all.
Kevin, I think people might be interested in what you're doing during lockdown scribically while you're not able to get to synagogue so much.
Well, because most of the work that I do is sort of long-term major restorations, I have a few in the shop, and you know, scrolls can still travel. I'm actually, this is something I'm doing. You know, many congregations are not having in-person bar and bat mitzvah, and I was approached last year about just, if a scroll can't be brought to a home, could there be just a piece of a Torah? It's not a Torah scroll, but it's I call it aliyah b'yad, aliyah is going up to the Torah to read a verse in hand. So I'm writing sections of Torah on parchment with quill. And even though they're not treated as a Torah scroll, it's not complete, there's something meaningful of having, these words of Torah that are written with the original tools and technology, and as much of the intention as I can.
That's wonderful. Terrific. I think actually Cynthia had another question, correct?
Yes,
Yeah,
I have a
good.
question, and it actually fits right into what you were saying about using parchment. So many of us are vegetarians at Becky. I would say probably more vegetarians at Becky than at most congregations, including our rabbi is vegetarian. And so the idea that parchment has to be animal skin is challenging. And I wonder if there's any discussion about expanding the idea of parchment, if anyone else has.
This is such a great issue. And actually, so one of the great vegetarians that I've known was Uri's father. And Uri, I don't know if you have any insight about, he was a vegetarian and worked with parchment. And I could give you my answer, but he and I actually talked about this quite a bit. So you don't need to, but
yeah, I don't actually, I can't actually remember him ever mentioning it. So it may have been one of the sort of compartmentalization things. But yes, dedicated vegetarian.
So, okay, so Michael and I have talked about a lot of aspects of this, and I'm a former vegetarian, but one of the important things, early on, Miriam said, oh, one of the things that I learned is kosher doesn't only refer to food. So a kosher Torah is written on the skin of an animal that could be kosher food, but the animals, I think maybe I referred to this in the film, the animals are not actually killed for the purpose of it. So if that makes any difference, we're making use of the animal's skin, but we're not actually harming the animal for that purpose. I think that was sort of good enough for me and Michael. Another colleague of ours suggested to me that for Torah, which is for the whole Jewish people, okay, the whole universe, it has always been that it's on the skin of an animal. But there's two other places. We have mezuzah that has small piece of Torah, and then tefillin. And as you get closer to the personal use, could you make an argument that it should be some other material? And I've done some exploration, sort of played with, well, what about tefillin that would be made from some other material that's for personal use? I'm not sure if there is a natural material that can stand up to a couple of thousand years of halakha saying it is animal, it is done very consciously.
But presumably there could be a synthetic material that could be used. I mean, I'm fairly sure of that.
Well, there could be in terms of writing, this fascinating project at the Jewish Museum of Berlin where they had a robot writing beautiful Torah, but it was done on paper. So if you take away one of the elements that it was already old information when the Talmud wrote it down 1500 years ago. It says, if it's to be kosher, it would be on the skin of a kosher animal. Anything else can be a beautiful handwritten Bible. So even though scribally there's good materials, what meets that need of being accepted as kosher for the whole Jewish people? And it's one of those conversations that the Talmud would take a few hundred years to really work through before providing an answer.
Has anybody started?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not a vegetarian, but you know, there are a lot of those kinds of questions. So the issue is, are there scholars out there discussing it? Cynthia, you should get somebody going.
Yeah, I mean, I am interested, you know, in some kind of natural organic leaf, you know.
Yeah. No, it's really important. I'll tell you, for me, it actually reminds me a little bit of the question about women writing Torah.
Yes.
So, you know, we don't know that women haven't been writing Torah, but we do have this body of halakha, of Jewish law, that says the Torah that a woman writes is not kosher. Now, clearly, there are congregations that are accepting Torahs written by women scribes as kosher. It's just very new. And I think that the conversation around how does that evolve or grow might be a similar conversation that we could have about the material of Torah. I just think that it's much less likely that we would conclude that a Torah that is not written on the skin of a kosher animal would be kosher.
Oh, I don't know. There are a lot, you know, there's a whole Jewish vegetarian movement, and
But don't eat Torah. I mean, physically don't eat Torah.
Yeah, I'm voting for hemp, for the hemp Torah. So.
I think the conversation has begun.
That's it in terms of any questions that are, you know, are in waiting. Oh, Harriet has a question. Go ahead.
So I once, there was a traveling Chabad show where they brought sofer and some Torah scrolls in progress. And I asked that question about whether a woman could do it, and they were very uncomfortable asking me, because their response was, first, why would a woman want to? And after we got through that, then he said that he didn't think that there was any reason a woman couldn't write it while she was impure, but in between, or if she was old, I guess, then he thought that there wasn't. So I'm confused. I didn't think that a priori there was a reason why a woman couldn't write a kosher Torah. So Rabbi Hale, I'm confused, I guess, or want an answer, please.
It depends what the question is.
Okay, so the
whether
question
I have an
is,
answer.
Can a woman who is not impure write a kosher Torah?
So one of the things about Torah is that it does not take on impurity, ritual impurity. I mean, even one that's, you know, quote unquote desecrated. And I'm not saying that, I'm actually not touching the question in a way. But the argument that whether someone is in a ritual state of purity or not as they interact with the Torah, to my understanding, doesn't really affect the holiness of the Torah. You know, someone who I comes to mind is Daniel Siegel, who is not Danny Siegel the poet, but Daniel Siegel, who was he's actually the first rabbi that Zalman Schachter Shalomi ordained. And I did some learning with him around get, which is divorce law. And he was working on this idea that a way into issues about changing of women's status is that when in the Talmud, women were talked about, it wasn't the same as talking about a woman today. And it's sort of a way of thinking about, you know, the world changing enough might make the categorization of someone who is not male, making by definition their Torah not kosher, that may actually not apply without negating it. It's I don't think it's in my pay grade to kind of discern it, but things change, and even reasons for things change. So as women's
So-
roles change, I think there can be an opening to even how our tradition looks at it.
So it is, I'm sorry, so it is that a woman cannot write a kosher parchment, or a woman cannot write a kosher Torah.
Harriet?
Is that the way things stand?
I won't say that.
Okay.
But
Harriet?
I'm not speaking for the whole of the Jewish world. And what we have now is this amazing situation in which, you know, by and large, liberal communities are becoming more and more comfortable with Torahs that are written by sofrot, of women scribes. And that sense of like there are now facts on the ground is a very powerful thing. And, you know, I don't remember if this was, Miriam, part of the 33 hours that didn't make it into the film or not, but I remember talking about how, you know, we don't sign a Torah. And when you have a Torah scroll, your presumption is this is a kosher Torah. You know, don't look for, it was certified that it was written by a scribe who followed whatever practice. So that fact of Jewish communities accepting as kosher a Torah, even written by a scribe who is not male, it's such a powerful precedent that we don't question, when presented with a kosher Torah, we don't question the scribe. In other words, with the scrolls that I'm privileged to restore from the trust that are 250 years old, I don't have any need to research and try to find out who wrote this unsigned Torah and were they following kosher practices. The Torah kind of stands on its own as a kosher Torah once it's accepted as such.
Thank you. And I might also add my appreciation in listening to you in the way that you're talking about this, that that you're describing it as Torah scrolls that are written by non-males, and that is more inclusive a perspective, or a possible future perspective, I might say, than saying, is it written by a male scribe or is it written by a female scribe? And as you mentioned, the context in which our society is changing over time will, and we as people active in the conservative movement, or rather in a conservative synagogue where there are certain perspectives on halakha, ought to appreciate that over time, the exploration of halakha with how those things interact with our life as it evolves is important. So thank you for not oversimplifying the answer. It's also a matter of, Harriet, I might say, because I made a statement before you came into this to the session about this, I might say also that whether a Torah is kosher or not might also be defined as by some people as who is it who wrote the Torah, but it also might be who is it who is accepting and using the scroll and what their intention is. And I think all of it's a very complicated, I think it's just a complicated area of halakha and ritual. Thank you for asking the question. And thank you, Rabbi Hale, for being careful about the way you were answering it. I think we have, Marcia, you had something you wanted to say or ask?
Yes.
Okay.
First of all, thank you very much for the film and for the presentation this evening. One little thing I want to comment on in the film, and then a broader connection. The one little thing is, it was fascinating to see sort of what I'll call a fancy pay that you were commenting on. I'd never seen anything like that. And I, am a Torah reader and such, and it was just so beautiful. And the watching you trace the, shapes of all the calligraphy in the film was at every point just so moving and beautiful to see the ink go onto the scroll. Just very moving. And the more general comment that I want to make is that I think I recognize you, maybe from Chavara Institute, and I studied with Michael Teva the summer before he got sick, and took a class that he taught on end of life, believe it or not. And it was, amazing and touching. And then when he came back the year later, very, very moving. I didn't want this opportunity to go by without my mentioning that. And I didn't know you, Uri, but I wanted to mention that. And also seeing Meryl Crean in the film was wonderful. I knew Meryl from Philadelphia and saw her more recently at a J Street conference. So our worlds intersect in many ways, and I'm sure that many other people who are sitting here in their homes have other connections as well. And so you bring to us not only the particular topic of your film and your presentation, but many more aspects of your lives.
Thank you, Marcia. Uriel, I think you wanted to make a comment or had a short question, I think you said.
Yeah, this is a quick question. So this is sort of more in the vein of, I guess, the question about the parchment. So this is, I guess, a material related question. So I've always been sort of struck by the, I guess, the origin of the ink coming from these oak galls, which it always seemed very dramatic. The idea that this wasp would sting a tree and then it would become this bulb that would then become a Torah. And I guess what I'm wondering is sort of why that particular ink is used. Does it have to do with sort of that dramatic origin, or does it have to do with certain properties of the ink?
I would consult a chemist.
I was just looking on Wikipedia. So again, this is something that your father and I think shared, is like, we just like we love these materials, and we were taught by someone who loved these materials and loved the stories that went with it. Eric Ray would talk about the formation of the oak gall in terms of, the mother wasp stings a leaf because and then that sting becomes the gall, which is the source. But it's all because she's motivated by the love of a mother looking for a home for her babies. So, on that level, I can honestly say, I don't know, but this is such a powerful midrash that it works for me. As you go back, there really are different recipes that may rely more on, say, lamp black than on that tannic acid of oak. But I don't know. I make ink. I don't trust my own ink to last, enough decades, but there's something powerful about, it's not just a bunch of leaves, but it's this particular kind of quirky interaction between an insect and a tree that makes the active ingredient in ink.
Okay, I think, thank you. Anybody else have a question? Otherwise, I think we're gonna turn it over to Shoshana Harriet. There's, there you are.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to thank you, Miriam Lewin. I think that the film was just so fulfilling. And in particular, during this time of COVID, it just filled my heart. And thank you. It just was so rich and terrific. And I hope that you'll be making more films that are similarly rich and fulfilling. And it was good to meet Rabbi Hale in such a wonderful way. It was good to watch him work at such a wonderful avocation. And so thank you. That's just what I wanted to say. It was terrific.
Well,
I sent it to all my family in California. So they
well,
might
that's
be Zoom bombing now. I mean, I don't know.
that's
but-
great. Well, on that note, I'll just say that I'm not making another film yet. I'm concentrating probably for a year on doing screenings like this. We're also appearing in a lot of Jewish film festivals. Any of you who have family and friends elsewhere who you think would be interested in a screening like this, I hope you will get my email address from Shoshana and Daryl, because Kevin and I are having a great time doing this and we'd like to do more.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our guests, Rabbi Hale and Miriam. This was really lovely. The film is very rich, and it is partly rich because of Rabbi, what you bring to it, which is you just bring your whole heart, and you're so accessible and warm. And so I think we all felt like we were in some of these rooms with you, which was really nice. And we all learned a lot. And thank you, Becky folks and everybody else, for asking interesting questions and sticking around for a long time. I just want to plug next week, we have a very exciting program. Anthony Mordecai Tzvi Russell, some of you may remember, he came to Becky a couple of years ago. He's coming back on Zoom, and he's going to do a program he calls Convergence. He's going to be talking about and singing African-American and Ashkenazi Jewish music, and where their convergences are, and the fact that we're communities in diaspora and how our music reflects that. So that'll be next Wednesday at 8 o'clock on Zoom at our regular time. So I hope everybody will join us. And if you know people who you think will be interested, spread the word, because he's wonderful. If you haven't had a chance to hear him, you should. He's fantastic and interesting, and he's a beautiful singer and a beautiful person. So, and I think that's it. Daryl, did you have anything else?
I don't think so. No.
Okay. Great.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Good
And
night.
everybody stay safe and stay well.
Yes.
And we'll see you soon.
Yes.
Take care.
It's a pleasure. And Daryl, thank you for your very personal introduction to this. That really moved me.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
I would love to continue that conversation. Actually, it's fantastic. And
Sure.
thank you all.
I'm open to, I'll answer any text you send me or email or phone call. That's fine.
Like so many of these, this feels like a family reunion, and it's wonderful to see so many familiar faces.
Wonderful.
Great.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.